So, Jojo, let's talk about cymbals, your new cymbals from Sabian, the Anthology series. I've had the pleasure of having them here at Sweetwater. I got to play on them. They are fantastic instruments. Tell us, the genesis of this whole project with Sabian.
Well, there's a couple of aspects to it. I mean, the most important thing, and this is where everything always starts, like with all the products that I created, and definitely the product that hit the market, the idea came from something that I want, and that I couldn't find. This is always kind of like the 0 point of like, I go, okay, I'd like to have this. And then I look for this and it's like, okay, I have troubles finding this. So perhaps it would make sense to create this. Now, not all the ideas that I come up with are suitable for, a mass market. The sticks were, like some of the cymbals that I made previously with Sabian, my bass drum pedal, those like, well, I see there's a gap, and I want to provide an alternative for what's already there. So these are kind of like the principles that I'm trying to let myself guided by, because there's so much gear already on the market, like I don't want to congest it even more, but it's like this would be hip if you would have this. So with Anthology, it's like this. I've been at close quarters with Mark Love on R&D for years. We developed many things, and Mark is such a an inspiring companion because he's curious. He's not afraid to deviate from the norm, to create something new. He's adventurous, and these are ideal conditions to get on the collaborations. Usually like the usual things of like fear and concern. This is too crazy. This is too out. With Mark, you can just, go at it, So like a bunch of things, my first thing that I made, like 20 years ago was the Fierce cymbal that created a small line of like Fierce cymbals that were a little bit at the fringe of the like the common mainstream taste, but the Fierce kind of gradually moved into the mainstream taste because they were very dark cymbals, right, and very wild cymbals, and at that point, cymbals were usually not like that, so we were ahead of the curve with all the dark stuff and those really complex sounding cymbals. But anyway, so we did a bunch of things like you can put on a snare to like embellish, and there was a lot of stuff that were just cool, but didn't have an appeal to put on the market. Now, the last time we launched on a broader scale a product was the Omni. Yeah. So basically, while we were making the Omni, and this happens very often, you develop so many other ideas. Okay, now let's just stay with this because we need to kind of like consolidate this idea. And you put this on the side, but they keep on circling and they keep on coming back. So with all the stuff that we did, that some of the stuff was released and some of that was not released, it's stuck in the era of 51 at Sabian. It's called like the whole wall with all the crazy Frankenstein monsters. And so I just all of a sudden, maybe 2.5 years ago or like 3 years ago, I went like, wait a minute. Okay, now we're actually have so much technology that we did not find what you would call a killer application. And all of a sudden was like, okay, with this knowledge that we have right now, that we came all from the HHX series, the stuff that spurred Weckel's line and spurred the complex line. there's an opportunity to make a cymbal like I always wanted it, and the Omni was a step into this direction. Oh, now we came full circle. It's like, I want a cymbal to be a real crash ride cymbal, and it has the functionality of all of those without compromise. Now, we all know that the idea of a crash ride cymbal is nothing new,
right?
And if you have and you might get a good cymbal that does it all for you. However, to be able to produce this in mass quantities has been extremely difficult without making certain compromises. Whereas, like, okay, there's a zone where I can ride it, and then it starts to wash out, and there's a crash, but it's not as smooth, but I can still use it for like a ride. So it might work for an individual drummer, but we never had the technology to really do it throughout the board and go like, okay, this is a 22-inch cymbal that you can excite with your fingertips. It's building up. Usually you can't do that, and you have an 18-inch that I can really go at it and ride it, and it doesn't go out of control. So this idea was at the beginning of, now we could make this cymbal, and I'd say, and Mark was into it, and everybody else was like, oh, let's give it a go, and I'm glad they did. It was a lot of work.
I'm glad you did too.
It was a lot of work, and it took a minute to actually, it's making a new cymbal. It's like solving a Rubik's cube.
Right.
You're like, you solve one thing, that's okay. Now we have the sweetness, but we lose this, and you go and then you mess it up the other side. So until you have the balance where like everything sits in the right place. Sometimes takes a long time, and especially during COVID, because usually I go to the factory and I spend a week up there and we tinker around and everything goes much faster. This time was like sending prototypes over to Europe,
Wow, okay.
Sending them back, exchanging videos. I had to learn how to, be able to make a good judgment from a video recording. So at their end, getting better microphones and all of that. So it was a learning experience that was quite steep and uphill. With I guess in every business we learned,
sure,
that it's more difficult to be like this, and if you actually sit at a table and you can have a cup of coffee or like a beer, and you have to adjust to that. So that became a part of the process, and also extended it, so it took a little bit longer than it usually would, just because of the remoteness. But we made it, we crossed the finish line, and I'm quite happy with what we came up with.
Well, they're fantastic instruments. I just recorded with them last week using both crashes, the low bell and the high bell, in a more of a rock sounding song. And they performed incredibly well. They washed over distorted guitars, great. So you could play all kinds of style of music with these cymbals. I think they really work in all genres.
I mean, for me, like the mark of a great instrument is adaptability.
Sure.
It's adaptability, and also that it allows you to project with ease. You don't have to fight against something. There's sometimes you find a really beautiful cymbal when you play it on the floor and it sounds sweet and it does everything, and you bring it into a band and you have to overplay it. Like it loses the sweetness. It might be not in the right environment. It might be great with like an acoustic piano trio, but then someone plugs in an electric guitar with distortion, and you're back to square one. Right. And we took those things into consideration with the Omnis, really. So okay, you can't please everybody, but you can set a standard from where you can negotiate, and I think there's always ways you can improve things, and there's no such thing artistically as, I believe, as perfection, but I think clarity is paramount, So I don't concern myself with like perfection, but I very much concern myself with like clarity. And it's like, okay, let's communicate this very clearly. This cymbal is made so it will adjust to the way you play. It doesn't matter if you play an acoustic jazz piano trio, or in a big band, or in a pop group, or rock. You know, like it has the elements of what make a great instrument.
Sure.
You know, it's just like, you know, they allow you to find your place in it.
Sure.
You know, they don't demand you to play a certain way. You know, and I think that is always I always aspired to that. And I mean, at that point, I can play on anything, you know, but like when I have something like, okay, this inspires me, you know, this makes it easy. Like it entices me to be more creative.
Sure.
And I think we wanted to put those type of instruments into musicians' hands.
Sure.
You know?
Well, I love the fact that you didn't label the cymbals as a ride or a crash, and that one of those selling points was you decide what the cymbal is going to do. So I think that's a really creative, fun way to bring a cymbal to market.
Well, I mean, if you're a guitar player, you don't walk into a store and buy a solo guitar or a rhythm guitar, right, or a lead guitar. You know, you're just going to buy a good guitar, and then maybe you treat it a little bit, you know, and, you know, whatever, you change the action, but then it does what you do, and the sound is in your hands, and the instrument lets it, you know, lets you express this, you know, so.
Very cool.
I mean, there was a time, you know, pre-Beatles, where cymbals were not labeled as ride or crash cymbal. And it was the level of education of a drummer that entered a music store. Like, well, I play in a loud band, I play in a big band, I need a heavier cymbal, I need a bigger cymbal, or an 18-inch ride is enough for me because I play in a bar with a trio. So our conception and our notion of like an 18-inch cymbal has to be a crash cymbal, that comes from a legacy of the past, let's say 50 years, you know, of like post-Beatles perception, and this doesn't have to stay like this necessarily, right, you know.
Well, I think you created a great thing, so that's awesome.
Thank you.
What's the goal for the next thing for you? You going to use the anthologies solely on your solo tours, or do you still mix and match with other sounds on your kit?
Well, right now I really tune my ear to like the anthologies, and I really want to play them, you know,
yeah, of course.
I'm like
yeah.
going out,
yeah.
and we did some gigs before where I played prototypes, because you always, you know, you always have to try those things in its natural habitat, because you develop stuff. And then it's also very important what an engineer might have to say, or what a bass player has to say. Say, hey, you know, this is great, but this is tone that like bothers me, you know. So you have to take those things seriously.
Sure.
Because you know, it's also possible when you develop those things that you develop some sort of like a industry blindness, you know, and so you need other people that you can trust to, that you honor their opinion coming in and give you a different point of view. Say, well, and once you have a cymbal that no matter where you put it, you know, it renders the same effect, then you know, basically we're done, you know, like we're ready. So yes, I do play right now with the tour I'm doing. I'm playing a 22 low bell, which is a bit counterintuitive, because usually in a band like this, I would probably recommend a higher bell because it has more amplitude. But that particular cymbal just has exactly the sound that I want, you know. And yeah, so as you might have noticed, like the high bell version of the hi-hats are a bit unusual. And this was an idea that I started previously with a prototype for the Fears series, which actually never went into the catalog. And because they were just super dry and super precise, but maybe a little bit, perfectly for what I do, but maybe not for everybody. So there was an opportunity to bring something that I really liked more into the mainstream, and we laid at the top. We did a little bit of different hammering to make them a little bit sweeter, and we left the inside unlated.
That's right.
And the reason why we did this is because it creates much more of a chunkier sound from your foot. If you're playing with your feet, it's like the chick is really massive.
Yeah, no, you definitely hear it.
And I think that's there is a trend of like drummers going to like larger hi-hat cymbals, like 15, 16 even, and I think it's one of the reasons because they want a chunkier vibe from like the hi-hat. There's something like almost like the hi-hat almost that the stick becomes a part of the cymbal. So it's really a broad reaction time. And with the high bells, we could really emulate that feeling, and it's really in good balance with the spread, because for something, sometimes you want a hi-hat that is very chocolatey and silky, and you like the spread, but sometimes the spread is too much, like when you open the hi-hat, you have to take them, like in the studio, it can create problems. You have to put the hi-hat microphone in like a bigger distance. So with this, you have this very precise articulation, and when you bark it, it doesn't blow your head off, but it feels chunky. Nice. It's almost like it was a compressor on it. It has a little bit of that feel. But that we're trying to stretch a little bit into something a little bit more unusual. But if you want to be on the safe side, then like the low bell hats will serve you well, I'm sure.
Totally agree. Well, that's so much great information, Jojo. Thank you so much. And I think you've created a really fun and very musical product. I can totally attest to how cool they are and fun they are to play, and they sound really beautiful to the ear. And would love to have you here to Sweetwater someday. I hope that happens, and wish you nothing but the best of luck, and wishing you the best for the gigs you have coming up in Europe. I think that's awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, all the best to you guys. You're doing a great job. It's fantastic, like the platform that you built. It's I'm a Sweetwater customer. I shop from you, and it's great. You can call and you get honest and very, 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 very good information. Like it's like the right product ends up in my hands, which is very important.
Well, that's the goal for sure.
Great, yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, have a great day and a great rest of your evening. And thanks again. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Have a good evening.
Cheers.
Bye. Ciao. Bye-bye.